Welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Mike. Happy Tuesday.
It's
Good
a
morning,
Tuesday.
Tommy.
Good morning, guys. Seth is right. AI almost took over my computer, but we're okay.
So far, so good. If Tommy's video cuts out halfway through here, you'll know his computer just took a dive and it's done.
You're gonna leave me behind.
We're not waiting for you, Tommy. We're just gonna move on. Main topic for today, so jumping in here. There are some kind of really interesting creative solutions that are occurring. People have been making some really good blogs. There's some hack together comments here. So Tommy's got a kind of a collection of articles here about talking about just being creative in data visualization and how that can kind of help your reporting. So we'll go through a couple of these articles. We'll kind of put them out. There's a couple from Data Chant. We have DataMark, something from Pierre, I believe, on Medium. Anyways, we'll kind of pick out some of these articles and go through these today. But before we go into our main topic, let's talk about the news. There's a couple items here I want to kind of touch on. One, I think that's very relevant here is, especially for any admins or people who are using the admin portal, this may or may not impact you very much. Microsoft has announced that the admin portal for the usage metrics is immediately retiring.
Not next month.
Wow.
Not next month.
This month.
This month. Like
Just
right now, it's done.
Come on.
It's a little short notice there. Not like I was going to actually download or use anything off the report anyways. So here's the link or the news article from Microsoft. So I'll put that in the chat. Did you use this at all, Seth? Honestly,
Yeah, I mean, periodically. I don't think we've ever gotten around to custom building a solution that would give me everything I wanted. So
yeah, I think
useful when there was nothing.
The feature usage and adoption report, which is now part of the admin, there's like a workspace now that is admin based.
It's a whole.
And I think all of the main objects. I mean, that number 4 item, the usage audit by workspace with a colored graph. It was like even the report they showed you there was like almost useless.
Yeah.
Like, what are you really going to do with it?
Use it like super high level, basic.
If someone really needed to know how many users do we have in Power BI, that's a great place to go if I wanted the most quick and easiest way. But it's never changed since I think they've had the admin portal with the tree map, with just count of numbers. It hasn't adjusted at all. So that's probably why they feel so comfortable also going, hey, just letting you guys know we're getting rid of it because no one's relying on it.
And I think to their point, to their credit here, though, there already is a much better report out there. And the new report, the one that they've kind of pushed inside to the admin workspace monitoring piece, there's a lot more data there. And you get all the same information and a lot more directly from this new report, which I do understand. It just is interesting that they just so quickly changed over and immediately make a change on top of that.
Do you think they're going to export it in there? Or they're going to keep it as the app itself?
I think they're going to continue to invest in the Microsoft admin monitoring apps. I think if anything, they're going to just make more apps that are going to be built in there. Honestly, so there's going to be. It makes more sense, honestly, to not embed a report in the admin portal. It makes a lot more sense just to put the reports in a workspace that is for admins that they just get to use. I mean, that makes it.
It's easier. It's easier from a security perspective too, because the Fabric role, right? The admin role enables and disables that workspace now, right? So you don't even see that whole thing. So if you're going to build out the whole administrative piece, that can be a completely separate space now, which actually makes a ton of sense.
And you can also go in the admin workspace and you can create reports on top of it. Are you able to share things out of there? Or is it like you can, I know what I've been able to do in the admin monitoring workspace is I've been able to take an existing data set that exists in there and make net new reports on top of it. So you can take the feature usage and adoption data set and build copies of the feature and usage adoption report. And then you get specific things that you're looking for, right? So I think even that's actually, one of the reasons why I think I would want to see this thing in the admin portal canceled is because I have no flexibility to change that. If it's a tree map, it's a tree map. I don't get there's no adjustments I can make there. At least now in the admin monitoring workspace, I can at least go create copies of reports. I can adjust them. I can make new tables. I can find what data points are more relevant to my organization.
Yeah, we've actually done that in the past, but it was with just the usage reports in a given workspace, and it was only for that team where the stakeholders wanted to see the usage of everybody. So this is much better that it's globally, it works the same way.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'm trying to think
Shut it down.
Shut it down.
I would imagine usage has got to be pretty low on it.
Probably right.
Like, why wait? Why wait?
No one's using it. Yeah. Cool. All right, moving on to the next topic. Kurt Bueller and SQL BI. So Kurt, I believe, works for SQL BI now, does some articles and blogging for them. A really interesting status. I think, Seth, you saw this one catch on LinkedIn. I saw it catch on Twitter. But there's Kurt Bueller has a status here around, there's this, what their what I guess SQL BI is calling, what do they call it? It's a library of reusable objects, patterns, and templates. That's what the Twitter post calls it. If you go to the SQL BI website, I think they're talking about using atomic design, report, and model development.
Atomic design, I think.
Atomic design. This is like the book I've been reading, which is called Atomic Habits. Very small things impact very big things. So I think the Twitter post here, I'll put that here from Kurt.
It's very scientific.
It feels it that way.
Their graph is like the building blocks of atoms, molecules, organism, templates, pages. Wait, what? Transforms it into the different objects, patterns, visuals, page templates, report templates. And it's much obviously from a developer bent, right? Like how do you structure the back end to be a repeatable, like rebuildable thing? So yeah, can't wait to dive into that one.
I think that'll probably be a podcast episode for us at some point.
I think so. So.
I did very much like to. I want to point out here is, objects like DAX measures build patterns like DAX patterns, which build visuals, which build a template for a page, which eventually builds a report template. And you can have all these kind of things that are kind of stacking. These are hierarchical things that you build. I'm very proud to say that Seth and I have been building templates since 2018. I mean, almost like 6 years now.
Long time.
So we've been kind of on this bandwagon of like, it's important to get templates created. It's nice to see some more of the community kind of jumping in on some of this as well. So not that we need to lay claim to this first, but we did it first. We were there.
I mean, it's a different area.
Yeah, this is
it?
to nuts. Well, I don't think this was really possible until we actually had the ability to create DAX measures and measures in Fabric in a semantic model there, because this doesn't really make as much sense if this is 3 years ago when we're talking about Power BI, because you're still dealing with DAX measures in a single model and desktop. Now you're actually talking about different components that, in a sense, part of it being structured later on top of each other. You're going to have DAX measures and tables that are going to be living in a lake house and a default semantic model, where it's going to, in a sense, it's going to be set there. It's going to stay there. So I really like it. I'm really intrigued, and I'm going to dive in this too in terms of organization, right? Because it makes sense, but you can't organize it that way.
Well, I'm going to pull back here just I think maybe a different thought here a little bit. Right? SQL BI has been the forefront. I mean, before I've even started Power BI anything, SQL BI had DAX patterns out for a long time. So they've already been so if you think about what they've been doing, they've, measures by themselves, they're really good at doing, documentation around what measures are existing. And this is, I say this because DAX.guide, it's amazing. It's the best documentation place for DAX. And then if you look up a level, then there is the patterns piece of this, right? And that's exactly what DAX patterns is. It's a whole book around, these are common patterns you're going to see when you build things in data. Use these patterns to build rolling totals. These are the most efficient ways to do these things. So that makes total sense. Where I'm kind of like laying claim to some of the part of this is, a lot of the template pieces, Seth and I think we were really very early on in templates are the thing to be doing. We should be thinking about how to build templates. And one of the things, these are all things that Microsoft really hasn't been able to embrace. They built the tool, they built the measures, but there's really no good place to collect the patterns, collect page templates, and collect report templates. There's nothing there that supplies capability. And the community, I think, is building these things for you. And so Bravo comes out. You can now add templates of tables, date tables, and measures. The theme gallery at Power BI Tips, themes.Power BI Tips, has report templates, full design templates, things for the reports. And I just don't see no one's really making page level templates yet. And you see what I'm saying? Kind of want to go with this, Tommy? Like, these things have been out for a while, but Microsoft's not building this into their tools.
Right. And I that one completely right, but they've always been separate. Anything page template, report design, and anything that's going to be semantic model. I think the idea here is that you can actually bind together what you're doing from the visual side with a measure. You still have to do all the drag and drop. Yes.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't disagree, but I mean, I think we talk about this at length in a different episode. But I think
do agree go longer.
And the reason is this approach seems to be very much building from the back. And then can you throw on page templates when you've got this perfectly organized model? Sure, you can. But guess what? That's not how the world works typically.
The world works builds from the front forward.
So tools like we build are designed so that as you're figuring out what a business user needs from the front end, you're streamlining the whole visualization experience, right? So I think this requires us to dive deeper into the article, what the offering is in total.
I like it,
and then we can embellish and talk a little bit more about it.
That's a good thought.
It's definitely going to be a topic. It's definitely going to be an episode.
All right, last one here is we have a lot of kind of newsy articles here. Tommy, which one do you think is best here? We have kind of three left: Fabric, .NET SDK, automate real-time intelligence using PowerShell, or the Power BI Refresh Performance Analyzer. I think the Performance Analyzer is what I want. I think that's the best one to talk about.
Let's do that first, because I'm going to totally dive into .NET. Because
no one's going to listen to that one, because I'm like, that's
you
such a
mean
nerd
by
topic.
By yourself somewhere on your other podcast. Okay. So what are we talking about? Performance Analyzer.
Okay, let's go. Let's do the Performance Analyzer first. We'll go through that one. All right. So this is an article from Andre talking about the Power BI Refresh Performance Analyzer. Let's put this out here. This is another. Is this an external tool? What is this, Tommy?
Yeah, so this is an external tool that will actually look at when your model refreshes and loads, basically really break it down in terms of what elements are taking place, with a really nice visual to actually see the different elements in a NAT, kind of like a NAT style.
Ooh, I'm going to check this out.
Yeah, so it's actually the perfect visual for this, but it's I think a really great way rather than just looking at the numbers. And I don't think we've really had anything this easily accessible to look at what's causing something to take a long time to refresh and reload.
I like it.
So I'm trying to thinking here. There's two kind of point out articles here that I think are very relevant inside this topic here. You can connecting SQL Server Profiler to Power BI Premium, so you can go look at refreshes that are happening inside the PowerBI.com service, as well as you can also connect the SQL Server, the SSMS SQL Profiler directly to desktop as well. And then there's actually a JSON file an external tool that adds this as well. So I'll have to go look at that. I'm not sure if we have that in our business ops tool at this point. I'll double check that one. Maybe we can go add that in there as well if we don't already have it. This would make sense to add into business ops. Excellent. In the past, Tommy, have you used the Performance Analyzer going through SSMS to look at the refresh, what's happening?
There's been a few times, but nothing where it became part of a process or a workload, because anytime you jump into the profiling tools, if that was not your background, and then how much you have to filter out just to see only just what's actually the execution of a model. I mean, it is for those who've never done this. If you weren't sure if you wanted to be a DBA, this is your test.
Well, it's coming out of SSMS, which is like the DBA tool.
Yeah.
Seth, have you played around with this at all? Have you gone through Performance Analyzer and kind of, read some stuff off desktop or the service?
Not specifically.
Okay.
Like we've dove
like a while ago, but like not like recently on like in-house stuff refreshing.
Been a long time.
This may turn into a little bit of beat from the street here, a little bit about like real world experience here that I've done. So I've played around with this. Actually, I spent a good amount of time. I was having issues refreshing data models with incremental refresh because stuff was failing, and I didn't know why. This is exactly the pattern I used to go figure out an incremental refresh was failing or was falling back. I didn't understand what was taking longer. Was it the SQL Server or was it the backend side? I don't remember if it was SQL Server or not. I actually don't know. Was it the backend not? Actually, I think it was. Actually, I think it was SQL Server. Now that I'm bringing my memory back about this, the SQL Server was returning queries that were extremely slow, and so there is a amount of time that takes to refresh the incremental refresh patterns. And on your first load, like when you create a new model and first publish it to the service, it's going to run a whole bunch of queries to fill all the partitions of your historical data pattern. And if it doesn't have the data, then it goes quickly through them. So there are occasions where if you don't write your views or SQL queries correctly on the back end, when it's query folding, it will take a long time to do stuff. And so I used this, and I actually went really deep. I used Phil Seamark's analysis. There's a report that I think Phil Seamark also put out around this, where he was showing you, they would give you the timing, and they would tell you which partition was refreshing, and then what was happening in sequence and time. Really interesting stuff. Anyways, I used this, and I actually spent a lot of time learning how the engine caches up a second model while it's doing the refresh. Because when it's doing refreshing elements, it won't delete the existing model. When you do a refresh, it spins up a brand new model, loads the data, and then swaps the data out at the very end, so you have your new data in your report. I think this makes a ton of sense. To me, this using this tool or something like this one was very helpful in solidifying how is the engine automatically building the partitions, reloading the partitions, incrementally refreshing things, and then I was able to kind of go into the weeds and figure out which partitions were failing and what was going wrong, and I could go back upstream to the SQL Server to go find what was the problem. Anyways, I thought this was very relevant, but it was super technical. To your point, Tommy, like this is not a normal business user level thing. This is a DBA solely or data engineering solely kind of exercise.
Yeah, the performance analyzer, there's so many filters and views you have to do. This is just a great visual of what you were trying to do before.
Yeah, excellent. All right, I think that's enough from the news. I guess we could transition. I did a little bit of a beat from the street here. Tommy, do you have any other topics? I think you've got some pipeline and items here you want to kind of discuss. I think we've been talking about this for a couple of podcasts now.
Yeah, I know. I'm not going to go.
Did you hit the pain?
I hit the pain, and the article is actually great timing by Microsoft with the .NET SDK coming out.
Okay, what's your deal about this, dude? Are you loving .NET SDK all of a sudden?
No,
I don't know how to write any .NET.
I want to stay away from this. So
okay.
I've tried creating my own applications because there were a few like start your own project, but I'm like, why? So I've noticed this with all the Fabric API documentation. It's all written in .NET. No, they just came out with something in PowerShell, but really until now, the only resources available for anything that had to do with the Fabric API was .NET, because you can use a service principal. There's no Python. There's even no HTTP examples by Microsoft, which was really strange that it was all .NET, because I'm like, who's using this now? So I was trying to basically set up a pipeline to run, basically click a button in Power BI that would trigger a pipeline. Pretty simple, right? If you were doing this in Data Factory, because you have plethora of resources. Well, one, I realized that there's no standard connection in Power Automate yet for Fabric, which I think is a little strange that they haven't come out with that yet. Scorecards are plentiful as actions in Power Automate. And then two, it's not nearly straightforward in terms of if you want to trigger a job run for a pipeline. Again,
there's no, the only way you can do it with an API, but pipelines cannot run without a user attached to it. So there's no server. You can't attach a service principal to run a pipeline via an API. And I'm quite frustrated by this because this seems to work everywhere else. Like anywhere else, if I'm in Databricks, there's an API to go run a pipeline. There's a Databricks to go reload a table or run a job, or like there's a whole bunch of other APIs and other tools that are just out there. Why is this not a thing yet? Yeah, exactly right. I agree with you on this one, Tommy.
So yeah, I'm just finding it very strange that they're putting all that time in .NET, even though all of us are Python, PowerShell, and just good old APIs.
So, you know what? I would, to your point, Tommy, I do agree. The APIs, I think, is the way to go. And I don't know this .NET. My guess is the .NET thing is not using anything else other than the actual APIs. There's nothing special about what they're doing here.
Oh, it's special. Did you see how much it takes just to do authentication with the .NET? We have to write down.
But isn't that just .NET though? I mean, that's just like that's just how they're doing authentic. My point is the .NET library is just a library of all the APIs wrapped in things that are like .NET-ish, I think. Again, I could be talking out of, I don't do a lot of .NET development, so I'm kind of talking naively here a little bit. But to your point, Tommy, I'd rather have just the APIs. And whenever I build applications, I build applications solely on the APIs. I don't use the commandlets. I don't use anything else because I know those things are fundamentally built on top of the APIs. So if the API doesn't work, the commandlet won't work. Like plain and simple. And there may be some couple little tricky things where the commandlets that Microsoft has built for Power BI, or I don't even know if they have Fabric commandlets yet. I haven't even really heard anything about that yet. But if the commandlets, sometimes they use hidden APIs that you don't actually see normally, but they're inside the commandlet sometimes. But that's, I think, more of a rarity than a common practice at this point anymore. Anyways, I'm kind of with you on that one, Tommy. I'm not a big fan of what's going on here. Maybe there's a bigger vision here of Microsoft building other tools they're going to integrate with .NET.
Doesn't this leverage or open more doors to custom applications not using embedded,
Yes, it does. I mean, I think what this is doing. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, like some of the we view Fabric and the entirety of this, analytics platform through the lens of like embedded or calling and retrieving data, etc. But in some cases, like, doesn't this make it easier for custom applications to integrate with the data on the back end side of this, which is extremely important if you're custom building something and you need access to the data sets or potentially the models or whatever pieces behind the scenes here. Like, you can't just assume that every aspect of the way we build things or put an iframe into something is a good user experience, because it's not.
So Seth, I think you're speaking truth to power here. That actually makes a ton of sense with their custom workloads that they're coming out with, right?
Well, I think to your point, Seth, I think you're right. And I guess when you said, Tommy, about the workloads, maybe this is a play for, hey, we're going to let more companies build workloads on top of the back end of Fabric. And this is a way they're seeing an experience of, there's a lot of .NET things that exist. And maybe that's their other, I mean, honestly, Microsoft is very self-serving in these ways. Maybe this is a way for them to get into the back end of Power BI for Excel or other things that are already written on, I don't know what Excel's written on, maybe it's .NET, I don't know. But there's other things that Microsoft has that maybe they're trying to like, hey, we need to get back into the back end. We need these libraries to exist for us to even talk to the back end of Power BI as well. Yeah. So there may be more items in there additionally.
It's funny, their quick start for the official Fabric documentation for the API say, hey, it's quick start, create an Entra app. Here's a C# script to get you started. I'm like, who's using that? But I think Seth, it really does make perfect sense if they want to do custom workloads. It's just up until now, all Microsoft documentation and the products that we've been using have been, here's a quick start with PowerShell, and a little Python.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, the vast majority of this pipeline and everything we're building is analytics for analytics tools for what we're using in Power BI, or data dumping or transforming and shifting and moving data around. But there's this whole ecosystem of applications that build visualizations, right?
Yeah,
it's not just it opens the doors to building those custom experiences if organizations want to, right? Because there is a very specific look and feel interaction between pages. Something has to go from here to there in this way, and they're not willing to, do that through Power BI embedded experience or something to that regard.
Mm-hmm. Good point. I didn't think that way. You guys are opening my mind. This is good. This is helping me expand my experience here. So thank you very much for going deeper on that one. I think that's also really good. All right, I think we're good at a good point. Let's transition over to our main topic of the day. I think it's time to jump into let's talk about the main item here. We'll leave the beat from the street behind. Main topic today is articles around being creative and not just in data visualization. Tom, you want to kick us off here and give us some kind of intro on this one, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, so this is one of our special topics where I think it just came from our previous discussions, but doing some research, and I think Mike, you actually suggested this topic. And okay, let's think about that word creative, and we've done episodes on it. But the default way to think, or I think the normal way people think when you think creative, Power BI, business intelligence, is our designs. It's going to be your templates. It's going to be how the report look and feels. But going through some of my old articles that I've saved from Community Jam, another shout out. Boom. Just typed in creative, and really there were some really interesting ones, like the hackathon that Microsoft did with just did last year for Fabric. Our Data Mark did a great one on how do you actually really transform a solution that you might have been working on with a small team and scale it out, which the approach to that is, I thought was, that's pretty interesting. Agile approaches, how to become a data-driven organization, and really just data storytelling. And I think when you think of yourself in our space, data basically as close as you can get to IT without being IT. There is I think a big need, one, for the talent or the skill to be creative. And I think two, to also have the time, and to part of what being creative is to try things out. I think a lot of times, just as you look at our intros, I can't believe .NET, and we're talking .NET and C# and Python, which is always usually pretty straightforward. It's get this data, pull it here. I think in our processes, I think in our conversations, communication with our clients, and how we actually grow our relationships with our organizations, and our approach is to connecting, extracting, transforming, and then communicating data. There's a lot of opportunity that I think is one of those known unknowns. I don't think we've explored it a ton because we don't think about it in that space. Usually we're very closed when we're building. So I think that's where I just wanted to start here.
You wanted to start with everything?
Yeah.
Everything. Just give a nice intro.
Well, I'll give you maybe a little bit of context of so to your point, Tommy, I like where we're going with the topic. I think there's a lot to unpack there. So let me start with a little space where I've experienced some, let's maybe call it pushback from the business, I guess. Often I'll be in the context of reports, and we'll be talking with the business, we'll be building some reports, and usually we get good examples, initial examples of what the business wants for reporting. Most often when I look at that reporting, it feels like we're talking about data dumps. I need this table. I need the data shaped this way because I have other processes that rely upon that. Sometimes when I step into these situations, there's this deeper level of thinking that comes with looking at the data and what are the outcomes I want to produce from that visual. I was working on a project recently. They are in the manufacturing or the shipping space, and there was this idea of, we have a limited number of trucks, and we need to make sure each truck is filled up. It's full. And so anytime we're not shipping a full truck of inventory or whatever it is, we're not fully maximizing our revenue. And so I was like, well, if that's our driver, if that's the information we're looking to get towards, what visuals can be put in place to say, okay, this truck will be leaving on this date. What is the opportunity for us to fill up that truck? And, the idea being, the closer that truck is to its leaving date, the more I should pay attention to make sure that it's full of inventory, to make sure that when it leaves, it's maximally using its space. So it was kind of like that thinking. It was a question of like a deeper level thinking. And we came up with a visual that showed this. It showed, hey, it was a bubble chart. We had some other things like how full is it? How many days away is it leaving? So we had quadrants of if things are in this quadrant, it's the truck is very filled up and it's about to leave. Great, we're good. But then when we had these other bubbles in the chart, well, this truck is not very filled up and it's about to leave in 2 days. Okay, we should really focus on what can we do to sell more space on that truck to get it to work, to sell, right? So it was that kind of mental thinking of we did this pattern with them. I produced the visual, and when we presented it back to the business, they weren't able to understand the concept of the visual. The visual just did not make sense. And so while some people were able to understand it, there was a data culture gap between what the rest of the business could do with it versus what was actually being shown to them. So I think this is a challenge that we face a lot with being creative. To your point, Tommy, and where I'm kind of going this, I'm going to try and bring us back around. In some situations, we're being creative to build visuals, pages, and reports to meet a specific need. But sometimes if our data culture isn't there, even though we're being creative, we just fall back to, I just need to get a table. I just need to get a bar chart. We're going to throw down a pie chart on a page because people aren't ready yet with their data culture to really digest these more advanced creative experiences and reports. So that's kind of my point there. That was a long way around to that point.
I really like Adrian in our chat says users think in data dumps because that's the closest they get to data sometimes. I would say.
So true.
It's like resonates right with your point, Mike, right? From the standpoint that it's a data culture thing, right? Like if people aren't used to seeing certain visualizations and or what you're describing is a well thought out bubble chart with quadrants, like how often are they interacting with those on a daily basis?
Exactly right.
Well, it takes a little training and learning for them to say, oh, okay, I find the meaning in that. So I think to me, there's two parts of potentially this conversation that resonate with me that I want to kind of dive into. One is what you're talking about is this solving the problem, right? There is a problem that you are going about trying to solve, and what you're doing is trying to build the underlying story, the narrative underneath this visual, right? And that's where, and one of the articles was talking about this too, is like the storytelling aspect of how he doesn't think AI is going to take over in totality because there's this human element. And if you think about the best reports, it isn't the best looking, right? Like that helps and aids people in digesting the information. What resonates is the meaning behind it, right? And I think that's one of the things that is lost sometimes in this translation between multiple different groups working on a project, not being close enough to the people who actually need the report, or we don't understand the needs completely, where you build something where you're not getting enough value in the data that's being presented. And it doesn't have to be like this, a very specific use case like you talk about. There are reports that are daily need reports. I need to see this information in this way, and it tells me something that I can make a quick decision on. That's a very valuable report, right? So I would almost argue like the narrative behind that is, hey, we're serving this pivotal business need where people need to know what's going on every morning to check in with their customers, and this report shows them that information. So I think it's that, like, and I'm kind of just lumping that into storytelling, right? But it's the value of the data that's being presented in visualizations. And I'll pause there if you guys have any comments, but then there's another follow-up I want to talk through.
I think that's a great place to kind of hang on here, because, man, it is all about not just the data, but I'll give you a brief story. So I thought I was the most creative person when I started with Power BI, and I always wanted to do more because I thought the bar chart wasn't enough. But it turns out people didn't care about doing multi-line visuals if they didn't, again, know what it meant. And again, the first example that you gave about what they need to look at every day, well, that's almost builds itself, right? Because the people know what they're looking for. And that's the big distinction there, where this is a number that's integral to me. I understand its context, and I know what I can, what will happen if it goes up or goes down. So in a sense, almost writes itself. But I think we get a lot of more situations when we get more granular in the business, when either we're dealing with departments where there are numbers that they need to see, but it's not that same, in a sense, direct action. However, it's just not what they're asking for. So I think a great turning point for me in my own career was trying to build a report off Excel. It was basically 90 different values or numbers of volume. And we basically changed the way the organizations were looking at their metrics, but they still had the volume, but the entire report became rates, because just a conversation with them is, okay, if you're looking at something 7,000 on a weekly basis, how much are you going to do if it's 5 more or 5 less? What they actually cared was something actually completely different. Mm-hmm. They just, part of it is not that they don't know, but that's how they've seen it. So I think a lot of times too, it's even before we get to the even report itself, in that conversation on, yeah, I could show you total sales, but that's probably not what's going to drive you. It's important, but the just volume of sales alone for a single person specifically is probably not the whole story, or enough of the story for them to really get any meaningful insight out of it.
I want to comment on I want to comment on both you guys are making great points here. Tommy, I like your point as well. Seth, I want to go back to your point as well. And your point is around something that brought up my mind here around, there's the Gartner Analytics Maturity Model. I don't know if you've heard of that one. I put it in the chat window as well here. So that's also out here as well. It talks about these, I think it talks specifically around, you were addressing, Seth. There's these things like descriptive analytics, diagnostic analytics, predictive, and then prescriptive. It's kind of like getting organizations to start saying, what do you recommend? A good example of this would be descriptive would be how much, to your point, Tommy, what you were talking about. I think a lot of times businesses argue about what are the descriptive analytics that we care about so we can make decisions. What do we look at historically? What is important? What is actually driving our business? And I think as we get further up here, when we start talking about predictive and prescriptive analytics, prescriptive would be doing the basket analysis and going to Google, I'm going to Amazon, and then Amazon's recommending, hey, here's similar products that other people bought that you might like to buy as well. And they may not even be anything close to the existing product you have on the store. You know, you may be buying a toy for your kid or something like that. And there's other products that are totally different. It's like, here's a beard trimmer. That has nothing to do with like your kid's toys, but it knows like your profile, what you've bought historically. And it's saying, here are some other things you might need. It's not even recommending it based on the actual product you selected, which I think is amazing. But that's, to me, a good example of prescriptive analytics. It's trying to say, here's what we think you should buy. I don't know if you can do this in all situations, but again, I feel like a lot of companies still are struggling with their existing insights and their hindsight, or the descriptive analytics portion of this curve.
Yeah, I think the chuckle I get out of that one is I just want people in the first step. Just get out, get people off the data dump.
Yes,
right. Like,
we're not even there. There's got to be one step before this data dump.
The same, right? Like data dump. Like, get it into the pivot table. You guys do pivot tables. This is the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is it. We can always go back to the granular. The other thought I had that I want to lean into and ask you guys a question, right there, Mike, when you were describing, you discussing this with the business, and they outlined that limited number of trucks, we want them all full. Here's the business case, right? Here's what we're trying to solve.
Yep.
Within this, a BI developer is faced with sort of, or I think should be, and I try to challenge my team to do this too, is this creative process, right? What do you guys think? Well, let me flesh out the whole thing. There is this creative process, right, that a BI dev needs to go through. Here's a business need. Here's a data set. You may get some basic requirements, but go build something meaningful. Like, you should have discussions with the stakeholder. You need to understand, right? We talk about communication, be empathetic. Do you understand like what they're trying to solve in their daily work? when you guys are going through this, what are some questions you ask yourselves around how do you build that report page, right? Like we have a lot of these pieces, but you can do what SQL BI is and create this really structured, rigid, methodology of like, how do you go build things? Whether or not everybody adopts every single time you do that, there's this point of how do I place things on the page? What visual am I building? How do I present this business need in the best way? Like, what are some questions you guys ask yourselves that help like take this raw information, and it's curated, right? And make it meaningful to the business.
I just go right to the themes.Power BI tips and just download the first most pretty gallery thing.
Yeah,
and that's it. I'm done.
I think he meant after that, because we all assumed that we already knew that. So
yeah, right. Which how do you do? You use that tool
after that,
obviously, but then like which data points are you putting in the particular places? And
so I've done this a couple of different ways, and I'll kind of describe a little bit of my process here around being creative and trying to get the business to come on board with what we're talking about visually. I've done it two different ways. I've built a report page with what I think are their needs. So one is you're building this bridge, I think, between, and this is where SQL BI process I think does make a lot of sense. You're building the model from one side of things. Here's the measures. These are the tables. This is how we have to structure the information. In some situations, you shape the model differently based on what you want to show inside the visuals. So I think for some of these more descriptive analytics, I can build tables, I can build dimensions and facts, and we can talk about the concept of how your company data stitches together. And we can start producing tables of information. So there's a couple pages in a report that are, here's what you're asking for. Here's the tables of data you care about, a matrix, a table, whatever. Then I think I like to spend some additional time thinking about, okay, let's listen to the business. Tell me what actions. And I actually try to prompt the business for, what do you need to do to make your team successful? What keeps you, like Tommy, you had this question, I love using it. What keeps you up at night? What are the things that keep you up at night that you think about? And then I build additional pages that try to say, okay, here's the question. I'm trying to say, I need to increase sales per marketing spend, whatever that is, right? So I need to tie this marketing spend to what increase in sales. And then I think about on that page, what visual or what creative visuals can I put on this page that start drawing correlation between this spend and the impact of that spend towards more visits, more sales, more something that's creating action. And so those to me, I mean, there's like a little bit of table stakes here, right? You have to have the data and you have to have some visuals there that people can look at. But eventually you have to get to a point where you're starting to push the boundaries of people's minds a little bit and being a bit more creative to bring in these bubble charts or extra things. And users may not get there initially, but at least you're having the conversation around what visuals are really driving action for you. So I've done that in a Power BI report by making one page per visual or a topic or a question per visual, where I maybe have 3 or 4 visuals on a page and the questions at the top, and I kind of explain, here's what I'm thinking with the data. And then the other thing that I use is I'll go to Figma or some kind of design tool, and then I'll just talk in concept. We'll just talk conceptually, what do you want to build? What's the flow of the report? Steve and I did a really good YouTube video around this one about talking about how to do report design. And it's kind of like, okay, we want kind of like a narration approach. We want an overview. We want some details. Like, what are the details? Just being able to quantify that out from the users, I think also helps you design a better report. So anyways, those are the kind of 2 approaches that I use. Tommy?
Yeah, so the what keeps you up at night one, it was my attempt, because we're not in the most authoritative position usually in these situations, because someone's coming to us and they say, I want sales, I want leads, and build a report. And it can be very, you need to be treading carefully before you go, all right, well, that's not really what you want. What we're actually going to do, tell me, like, what is concerning you? Because they're like, no, you just build a report, dude. So it's also the relationship here too. It would be great if we could go in, like if we were a consultant to everybody, and that everyone was waiting on our every word to see what insights we had, but that's not always the case. So to your point, Mike, I start off, regardless if it's a client I had forever or someone new, where that first question, like, well, okay, what would keep you up at night if we're not getting anywhere? Just you get to this point where we begin to, in so many words, calibrate people. They think they just want leads and they want to see that on a monthly basis, but that's not what it would stress them out on a Friday night if something were to happen. Let's find that. And I'm trying to still find a better way to say this, but I want to know if this number were to go up, how like, or if the number was going to go up or down, at what point would you get hired or promoted? At what point would you get fired? That's kind of the name of the game. And again, there's a better way to say that, but there are, and again, those pain points on both sides of doing great or doing worse. So let's begin to start there. And rather than being all negative, one of the best kind of, I think, things I have in the tool belt is, let's say we weren't building a report. Let's say, and I've used this before on the podcast, but say we had $10 million and 100 people working on just this project, right? It doesn't have to be a report. What would it do? And that, to me, I have found the best gold from people where, they weren't sure how to explain what they wanted for the data. And really, we find in those situations, like, okay, I may not do all of that, but I can do pretty good with it. Because I'll give you a really good example. Was working with one of a sales team, and there were 7 sales teams at the company. And it was like, okay, now we're on the 7th one. And they're like, well, we want to see what everyone else does. Like, okay. So I asked that question. All of a sudden you started hearing all the reps kind of talks like, well, I know you can't do it, but it would be great if we saw, who to contact based on, like, if they're 3 days out from not being a gold member anymore, kind of thing. And it was like, that's not a metric, that's not a sales number kind of thing, but it was just more like almost behaving like an app. And I'm like, and I'm going through my head, like, I can do that in DAX. Like, there's a DAX way to do that. I'm like, we can build that. And this mind blowing, because when people are asking you for data, again, they're expecting to get a bar chart. They're not expecting this, intimate conversation you're going to have. However, there is something that they want. And it's just really that step here. I try not to bring up bar charts or the, any functionality at all at this point, if you can do that, because again, there's a very ideal if people are also willing to play the game with you too. However, it's very hard if you don't have someone on the other end who's not willing to at least open up or have those conversations. Because to me, and I'm not going to do a hot take on this yet, but I'll pause there. But I think that's really the preferred approach.
My take on this is this, right? Like, typically, regardless of whether or not I build it in these ways, I'm always, and I'm thinking about like a report in total as opposed to a specific case, like you were talking about, Mike. Like, I'm
a visual, yeah,
right?
Yeah.
I always start with the kind of what we started with a long time ago. There's a summary, right? There's key metrics. Am I being held to something, and I need to see that progress, on a page, right?
What's my measure?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no, right?
Yeah.
Do I need a summary page or a KPIs page or something that tells me, like, boom, here's my numbers for the day, I'm moving on. Then I think, okay, great. Do I need that page or not? Then I have an analysis page. And typically this is the page where I'm building some visualizations, maybe some matrices or some detail, but it's the page where I can use all of these things to dive into the data a little bit more, and then a details page. And more often than not, that's just a table of information. And I play off these things, right? Like, as I'm thinking about driving an experience, I have to, and I think somebody in the chat said this too, like, I think one of the most important things to nail the creative, like, process part of this to give something valuable is to sit in the chair as the stakeholder. And it does not matter whether or not somebody's giving you requirements and saying, go build this, or you have to, like, think all of this up for yourself. Always sit in the chair as the stakeholder and think about, how am I going to do what I need to in their role to make decisions based on what it is we're trying to solve. And this does two things. One is it automatically will generate other ideas for different reports or different pages, probably, right? Like, oh, well, we're about this scenario, but this, I know this user doesn't have this or this or this, and those are conversation points for another time, but also something that I'm gleaning as I'm sitting in this role, trying to like solve whatever I'm building for them. So I'm looking for those visuals that allow them to quickly digest information, whether that's on summary or analysis, but also use these visualizations in the context that I want them to use them as filters on the page, right? One of the greatest things about Power BI is like, oh, that's an interesting bar. Like, click, everything else filters, right? Oh, okay, well, that did this to this visualization, like shift click, hold that, right? Control click, like all the interactions that I can hold and retain the parts of the data that I'm finding as I'm going back and forth between these visualizations. And that's why sometimes it's really like, is it necessary to have 3 bar charts and they're producing information in different ways? Well, no. But if I click on one of those bars and the other ones change in an interesting way, now I can start to segment data. So I'm looking for opportunities to make visualizations play off each other to produce something I otherwise wouldn't potentially see in the data set. And that's why visualizations are important, because they key you into things that you're innately not just going to understand or look at from a table. So and then the last point is, I as I'm building, as the report creator, I have no limits, right? I have access to the whole data model, but I have to think in terms of what I'm limiting the end user in doing, because I'm only producing so much information from the data set typically. So I always think about, how do I have to interact with this data? What other things am I going to want to slice and dice by? Because that would drive what additional columns and things I put in filters, right? Or slicers, just as add-ons, because it's part of the business. Like, as I'm interacting, of course, I'd want to know, who the owner of this is. It's just not relevant completely to this page, but it's in my org, right? Like, I need to know territories, and that's like over here. Oh, hey, it'd be really interesting. Maybe we should talk about another page that's all territory driven and blah, 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 right? So I think keying in on like this empathetic role, sit as the stakeholder, but I'm also trying to take what the tools of Power BI allow me to do to create this experience that I know is valuable, right? Because I have my own data sets where I interact in this way. And by taking that, I think you drive a lot more of that business value and that narrative into that production light for the end user.
I'm literally taking multiple thoughts down here and writing them down to paper here. It's probably about time. We're right around time right now on 8:30. So let's maybe do some final thoughts here, and we'll kind of wrap it a little bit. But Seth, would you quantify that your final thoughts? You want to jump back in for some more final thoughts?
My final. All right, I can quantify my final thoughts.
Good topic on that one. So I want to respond to your comments there, Seth. I think you do a great job of summarizing a lot of what we're talking about here for creativity. It feels like creativity in report design kind of flies in the face of what I'll use. There's this term called self-service. Are you doing exploratory analysis of your data sets, or are you doing explanatory analysis of your reports? An explanatory report seems to be a bit more designed for a specific purpose. The exploratory seems to fall more in this self-service space. So for me, I feel like explanatory reports are a little bit less creative. You have a little less liberty to get through the creative portion inside the exploratory reports. Not saying it doesn't happen, but it feels like there's better requirements around what do I need to do to run my business in a daily way. And it doesn't need to be, it probably isn't a fancy report. A lot of times I use bar charts, and that seems to do a lot of the needs of what I need met. So I think in that respect, there's this kind of balance between, using self-service, not using self-service, getting handed reports, and having someone design them and give them to you with clear requirements. The last one I really like your point, Tommy, your last point, and I really want to emphasize this. It's going to be very important for you, I think, as a report developer, to step back and give the business freedom to explore what they really think they need. I really like that idea of like, okay, imagine no budget, imagine no holds barred. I think sometimes we focus too much on the details in the weeds. And to your point, Seth, the example of, well, in this one example of this customer at this point in time, we had these, and you go down this long rabbit trail of like this very, potentially narrow thing or narrow thinking. I think stepping back, or at least giving the business the flexibility to step back and say, big picture, unlimited money, unlimited budget, what do we do? That maybe is something we can do faster now with these new tools. And so I think the idea of that, or at least allowing the business to think that way, you may not be able to deliver that day one, but at least you can start working towards it. And that should be sort of your bigger vision on where you go with reporting. So those are kind of my two final thoughts. Maybe take a step, look back at the big picture, and really evaluate what your reports are doing for exploratory versus explanatory reporting. And maybe those are going to allow you to have more or less creativity based on those kind of two patterns in report building. Tommy, what else? What's your final thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm not going to end on a complete hot take, but a slightly hot take. So
okay,
we'll see how it goes.
Medium take.
Yeah. But honestly, if you're doing it right and you're in the right place with the right people and you have the ability to also have the skill of discovery, 80% of the requests that you get should be drastically different at the end than when the ticket came in.
I agree.
Got it.
Report, that's a constant issue.
Completely different than what they asked for.
The requirements change faster than we can get them done in the first place. So I like it.
It just reminds me of something that just happened yesterday. It was like, where one of my devs was like, what do I do? Because obviously my estimate blew out of the water because of this exact scenario. It's like, just add a comment, man. Like, we got to get, in this case, we got to get this one done.
Requirements change. Like, we got to ship something, and then we'll come back and fix it later. That's a phase 2. I do a lot of. That's a phase 2 requirement. Let's move that to phase 2.
As we slaughtered the end of the show, is it phase 2 or is it something that's core and we need to get it out anyway?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we need to do a phase 2 on this fucking conversation.
All right.
Awesome. With that, thank you very much for listening. We appreciate your ears today. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. I hope some of this insight around being creative, what you can and cannot do, pushing on the business, getting more thought around where and how you build reports for your team, may this help you with your conversation. With that, Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple and Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps out a ton. Do you have a question, an idea, or a topic, or even maybe a awesome story that you had that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Head over to powerbi.tips/podcast. Leave your name and your great question. Guys, you've been submitting a ton of mailbags. Keep it up. And finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central. And join us on all of powerbi.tips social media channels.
Thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Appreciate it.